Ago Medasi, West African Fante, Akan, tree language, just saying, may I have your attention, please? And thank you. Welcome, 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 everybody. Welcome. Happy Sunday. Hope everybody is doing really well out there, reaching your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health. As always, that's our wish for you, each and every one of you, except if you're the enemy. So we are glad that you're here with us. We don't wish the enemy health. We wish them complete destruction because that's what they wish for us. But we're glad you're here today for this important topic, best practices for African solidarity with Palestine. And we thank you all for joining us for this important topic. We're building from the session we did a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Zionist Israel's sabotage throughout the African continent. So we're building on that today. And we start, as we always do, by giving thanks and appreciation to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. This is their land that we walk on, exists, their air that we're breathing. And I know some of you, some people out there, like they have problems with that. You know, well, it's everybody's land, it's everybody's air. But if I came and took your car keys from you and took your car, you wouldn't be saying, this is everybody's car, you can just have it. You know, so clearly you have an understanding of when people's life is dependent upon their relationship to the land, and that's taken from them, that's going to have a very adverse impact on their ability to exist and develop as a people. So let's not play games with truth and reality. This is indigenous people's land. And by indigenous, we mean the American Indian people, nobody else. None of the fake Europeans that want to try to convince you that they're indigenous people. None of the confused Africans who want to try to convince you they're indigenous people. We're talking about the American Indian people. They're the indigenous inheritors of this hemisphere, and we stand 100% in solidarity with them in their quest to get their land back. And by the same token, we give nothing but respect and appreciation to our African ancestors who are the only reason that we are still here today. None of these governments, if they had their wish, had any concern or desire about our survival and development as a people. It is only the mass struggle engaged by our ancestors fighting uncompromisingly against the forces of oppression that have been coming for us for 529 years. They're the only reason why we breathe air today. If you had a meal today, you need to thank and you're African, you need to thank your African ancestors. If you went for a car ride or a bike ride, if you watched television, if you played dominoes or spades, basketball, whatever you did today, you need to thank your African ancestors, because the greatest crime in humanity is to be ungrateful. And if you're not grateful for the sacrifices of those who came before you, then what good are you to us today? So we thank our African ancestors every step of the way for everything that they had done for us. And we stand here ready always to contribute to furthering their legacy, their proud legacy of dignity. That's what we're here to do. So we respect them. We thank you again for joining us today. Best practices for African solidarity with Palestine. And we start, as we always do, by talking about who we are. Ahjamu Umi here, longtime organizer in the All African People's Revolutionary Party on 3 continents and the Caribbean. And with me is Shukura, who grew up in the APRP and now participates in the APRP as an adult, and just happy and honored to share this space and many other spaces with her as we do. She and I got the opportunity to participate in our All African Women's Revolutionary Union Assembly meeting this morning, where we talked about the question of gender binary. We're doing some critical work in the party right now that most people won't really understand. It'll probably be another 20, 25 years before people really understand the importance of this groundwork. But just glad to and honored to share this space with her and do this work with her. And then the objective of the APRP is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, Again, we define that as one unified socialist Africa. One unified socialist Africa. We are convinced that this is the solution to the problems 2 billion African people face all over, scattered and suffering all over the planet Earth. And our strategy to achieve Pan-Africanism, because it's not just some idea in our head that we hope that God will drop in our laps one day. It's work that we engage in to bring about. And so we have a strategy that's laid out in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which you see on the right of your screen at the top, written by our founder, Kwame Nkrumah. And in that book, he talks about the need for African revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa to unite around this objective, one unified socialist Africa. And that's the work that we'll be engaged in. And we'll talk at the end of the program about Pan-African Women's Day, which is coming up. But some of these organizations you see there are participating because, again, we're building a worldwide fighting force, you all. And we have chapters all over the world and relationships with other liberation movements, non-African liberation movements who are fighting for the same types of things that we're fighting for: justice and forward progress for all of humanity. So to get us started with our topic for tonight, African and Palestinian solidarity, we will start as we always do. I'll turn it over to Shukura.
Thank you so very much. And, you know, I echo everything my dad said. I hope that we just continue to not only, you know, think about how we want to take care of one another, but continue to show empathy and continue to show collectivism and kindness, especially with new cases rising across the world. Let's continue to remember that, you know, this is really what's going to change a lot of the outcomes that we're facing is our continued efforts of looking after one another and continuing to build up that momentum that we've started. So I'm saying that to say, I hope that we all continue to remember how we got to this space that we're in and continue to move forward with this idea that we really do need to think about one another. We really do need to look after one another. And we need to make sure that we are all, for the most part, doing okay. And part of that means encouraging one another to join organizations that are working for justice, because we're now seeing a cycle of people empowered continuing to determine and decide how we live our lives and how we do what we need to do based on the fact that we do or do not have an income that is satisfactory to them. So if we are considered poor, or if we are deemed as not having income, then we're not of value, which means our lives don't matter. And if we die tomorrow from a new strain that exists in the next 26 seconds, it won't matter to anyone. But we have to continue to remember that we do matter. And we have to continue to remember that there's no value that's put on human life. Human life matters. And that's all there is to it. So with that being said, we really want to focus on how can we be allies to our Palestinian family, because they are going through some serious turmoil right now, and we are no stranger to that, unfortunately. Since the mid-1900s, organizations have been advocating against Zionism and occupied Palestine, and probably even before that, but I have actual evident hard-based copies of actual publications since the 1900s, so that's what I can speak to. But the narrative has been abused to help people understand that Jewish people have been displaced. Jewish people have been the victims of this situation. Jewish people are the ones who are suffering. All of those statements are true. Africans, I am not saying that none of those statements are true. Jewish people have been displaced. Jewish people are victims of a situation. Jewish people are the ones who are suffering. My issue with those three statements is that the narrative conveniently leaves out Palestinians also being displaced. It leaves out Palestinians also being victims of this situation. And by default, they are victims of the situation because of the impact on the Jewish people. And last but not least, Palestinians are definitely suffering. And it's so interesting how the narrative just accidentally doesn't mention that. So we want to continue to honor organizations that have been unapologetic about providing literature, about providing resources, and about providing an understanding for us that not only is this not okay, Palestinians deserve their land back, occupied Palestine needs to be Palestinians walking on it, But we also need to look at some of the examples throughout the timeline so that we can start to look up and read more about this if we need more information. I encourage you all to look up some of these materials that I'm about to share with you, because maybe you can suggest them for your work study spaces and circles, or maybe you can start an organization and introduce this as a part of your reading list for your work study circle or space. And so, many organizations knew that Palestinians were left out. And to name a few, they spoke out against it, but there's a small but mighty list that I'm about to share with you. So, of course, in the 1940s, the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad was known continuously talking about how just outraged the organization felt and the stance that he took to represent the organization of the Zionist efforts to steal Palestine from the Palestinian people. In 1967, after Malcolm X was assassinated, Ethel Minor, I'm so grateful for Ethel Minor, they wrote an anti-Zionist position paper for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And this became the first organized support from the African struggle for Palestinian people in the United States of America. And I just think that that is so incredible, because we know so much about what was happening in the late 1960s here on US soil, but we don't really think about how, again, everything is dialectical and everything is Pan-Africanist at the end of the day. Africans in America are not going to be able to get their land back unless they unite with other Africans in Jamaica and other Africans in Cuba and other Africans in Miami and Africans in Canada and Africans in Europe. We all need to unite together, because Africa belongs to any African who belongs to the African nation. And that was our brother Kwame Nkrumah who said that. So it's very clear to me that for Ethel to publish this piece from SNCC, obviously based on, being in the United States, but understanding that Africans in the US need to support Palestinians because this is their fight. And so therefore it is our fight because we are with them. And I am just so grateful for that, especially because that was the first groundbreaking piece of history to identify support from a US organization that understands the international struggle and the international connection. And as we continue to think about that, we know that there were many African liberation movements and parties in Africa, such as the ANC and the PAC in Azania, or as you may know from the colonized term, South Africa. But Azania is the true name. And so the Convention's People Party in Ghana and the Democratic African Liberation movements and parties, all of those expressed support, the Party of Guinea, expressed support for the Palestinian people during the 60s and also in the 70s. And then last but not least, I mentioned this a couple of seminars ago, but in 1967 and then again in 1986, the AAPRP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, went worldwide for an anti-Zionist front. And then they did the same thing in the 1990s, where they had an emphasis on Zionism as an oppressive empire. And so as we continue to think about this, I mentioned our PDF that we had listed on our work study reading list. And I'm just going to read a quick little excerpt from it, because I think that it really speaks to what we're trying to talk about today. And again, I strongly encourage you to get your hands on this, because it speaks to a lot of what's happening today, even though it was published first in 1977 and then again in 1986. So the All African People's Revolutionary Party is distributing this, our second educational brochure on Zionism. The first educational brochure, which was printed in 1977, was entitled Israel Commits Mass Murder of Palestinian and African Peoples. Zionism is racism. It must be destroyed. We distributed more than 500,000 copies throughout the United States and in other countries. Like its predecessor, the second brochure has a central purpose: the education of the masses of Africans, all people of African descent, wherever they live in the world, are African, about Zionism. So the whole purpose of writing this brochure, family, was to help educate Africans on Zionism. So again, we are no stranger to our Palestinian family. They are blood to us, and we need to do everything we can to help fight with them, stand side by side with them and help fight with them. As I continue reading, the brochure goes on to say, in our first brochure, the AAPRP called for the creation of a well-organized anti-Zionist movement within the African community. I'm not making these words up. This is written right here in the brochure. So I don't want you to think that we are separate. We are definitely one of the same, and we both have to support one another in our fight to get our land back. Unfortunately, now I'm reading again. Unfortunately, we did not achieve this objective, although we made tremendous progress in the anti-Zionist struggle. We continue to call for the anti-Zionist movement. We also simultaneously continue our call for a worldwide anti-Zionist front. We are capable and determined to intensify our efforts in order to achieve this end. We are also confident that other movements and organizations will also step forward to join the AAPRP in the struggle to achieve this objective. This anti-Zionist United Front must wage a broad-based educational offense to educate the masses of peace-loving people as to the truth about Zionism and its immoral state of Israel and its allies worldwide. And then it goes on to talk about how Zionism has become weaker. So it introduces the organization BASIC, stands for Blacks in Support of Israel Committee. And we've talked about how Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, all these Africans that are in positions of power today identify and affiliate with still being a part of BASIC. So BASIC is still a functioning organization that exists, and their sole purpose is to support Zionism, okay? So we want to continue to think about that, and I'm so grateful that the brochure breaks that down to help us understand that. And then it just continues to talk about, you know, how our connection is to Palestinian people and why we need to see this fight as their fight. It goes on to talk about how some things we can do, and it defines Zionism and talks about how Jewish culture started in Africa. And so it's a really great brochure, family, and I would definitely encourage you all to check it out when you get a chance. If you are interested, you can reach out to my dad at abetterworld.me, and I'd be happy to provide you the PDF. Next slide, please. All right, so I alluded to some of this in the previous slide, but I just want to make sure we're clear. This is our fight too. And I think part of that is helping us understand that we have to stop this separatist ideology that we have, the separatist ideology that was taught to us to make us think, oh, that's too bad that that's happening to them. No, that's happening to us. And it literally is happening to us. So it's not just it's too bad it's happening to them. It's, my goodness, this is outrageous that this is happening to both of us. We should organize together because there are stronger numbers when there are greater people. And we should figure out how to help you get your land back and how to help us get our land back. Wouldn't that make the most sense for us all to come together and unify? Not only do we sympathize with Palestinians because we have lost our land, but as you see on the slide, just as they have lost their land, but we both are being exploited at this very moment. Palestinians are being exploited for the use of their land and their resources, and Africans are being exploited for the use of our land and our resources at the expense of Israel forces, okay? So we definitely have a common enemy, all the more reason to unite us, but even if we didn't have a common enemy, we still understand what it means to not have your land. We've talked time and time again about how land equals power, and so we want to continue to understand that this was not done right, and it needs to be rectified. And that's the bottom line. If you identify as an African, and even if you don't, I'm speaking to Africans, but however you identify, you should try to think about how capitalism has taught you to think about individualistic perception. What do I mean by that? What I'm trying to say is if you are an African, or if you are an Asian, or if you are an indigenous person, if you are a poor European, however you identify, try to think about reversing the teachings and draw out the differences. So the system has taught us to draw out differences. Like I just said, oh, that's too bad that that's happening to them. This separatist model where I just think about myself and I don't have to think about how their land not have, how the Palestinians not having their land is impacting me as well. I don't have to think about that. All I have to think about is the fact that Palestinians don't have their land, so that's all that matters. My apologies, my dog has a brand new toy that she is in love with, so I'm gonna leave her and go to another room. But anyway, so as an African, you want to try to reverse the teachings that the system has taught you in terms of how you're drawing out differences between you and other communities, because the bottom line is there's really not that much of a difference if you really think about it. And that's why you want to try to reverse and unlearn it, because you and other communities or other races, instead, you want to think about similarities that you all have, because the bottom line is if you are not rich, if you do not own land, if you do not have some grand pot of money somewhere, and you happen to be European, I guarantee you, you can identify with some of these levels of oppression that we're talking about. And so that's why you want to pull out the similarities, because there's always going to be a connection between you and someone else who also is not European and rich, or someone who also is not rich, or someone who also does not have access to a pot of money somewhere. 9 times out of 10, things are not as different as you would think. And let's just think about some examples. So there are ingrained exploitive similarities between all communities that are either poor and European or that are of color. So we just talked about so many examples of Palestinians and Africans. And let's think about the connection between indigenous people and Africans. We both had our land stolen from us, and we were kidnapped from our land, but Africa does not belong to the Africans, so therefore it is stolen. Think about poor European people and Africans. I mean, there's a reason that we have speakers from Haiti. We have speakers from the, I think, Daddy, help me out, but I think it's the socialist, Irish Socialist Republic organization. I'm mixing up the name, but there's a speaker who speaks from that organization every single year at ALD. There's a reason for that. That's not by accident. That's because all of these speakers, we have speakers from Venezuelan organizations. We have speakers from organizations in Cuba. Of course, we have speakers from home. We have all kinds of speakers from Tanzania, speakers from Guinea, speakers from Ghana. All of these are by design, because all of these people identify with organizations that are fighting to resist colonialism and to get their land back for the people that identify with that land. And they all have a similar fight in Africans trying to get our land back too. So the people who create the program for ALD know to call on those people, because they have a same fight, a same dog in the fight as we do. And so again, wouldn't it be better for us to collectively work together, put our minds together, instead of building like one little piece of the brick? Like, let's build a whole house together, because we can do it. Unfortunately, because we all understand what it means to have something taken from us, and not by choice. There's a connection between Asian people and Africans. Think about the relationship that Malcolm X built with the different people that he was working with that identified with the Asian community. And I want us to also remember, the media is trying to convince us that we're all different. We can't allow the media to do that, because that's how we perpetuate individualism and elitism. We need to erase that, and we must push back against it and find ways to unite, because unification is the only way. It is the only way we're going to reach any of these goals that we have. We have to resist, and we have to think collectively. And if you need some more examples, my dad talked to us about Che Guevara and their fight that they helped when the Congo was under attack. I want you to think about Fidel Castro and all the work that he did in helping to make sure that Africa had what it needed. Think about Cuba's continuous support time and time again. But the most recent example I can think of is their ability to graduate all these doctors and have the doctors travel throughout the world, putting themselves at risk. And for what? To reduce the COVID-19 outbreak. And then just Cuba's fight in helping to decolonize Africa. There's so many other examples that I could give you, but I do need to turn it back over to my dad. So I thank you all so much. Stay safe, and a lutua continua. May the struggle continue.
Thank you, Shukura. Thank you, as always. And I'm just going to keep that energy going by talking about confusion about solidarity, because there's a lot of confusion within the African communities about what solidarity is, first of all, and then secondly, why we should be in solidarity with non-African communities. There's a lot of discussion, talk, and confusion about that concept. So let's start there with my piece and just talk about what that looks like. So I think it's important. We have to understand solidarity is always a two-way street. And the way a lot of people talk about it, because they're not involved in any organized struggle, their whole consciousness comes from, the PhD they earned on YouTube from watching YouTube. So they don't really understand what is meant by saying solidarity is a two-way street, because they're not doing the work. If they were doing the work, they would understand it, because they would encounter the two-way street. So what we mean by that is that this is not a thing like Shakur talked about, all the instances in history where African people have expressed solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And some people, because we don't study, they say, okay, yeah, we're doing that for them. What are they doing for us? Well, if you were involved in it, you would know. The reason why we know It's because we're involved in the fight. And because we're involved in the fight and we have an organized political education process within the All African People's Revolutionary Party, guess what? We have learned how the Palestinian community has united and supported the African liberation struggle. And I'll just give you a couple of quick examples of that. First, we talked about, if you saw our session a couple of weeks ago on Zionist Israel sabotage in Africa, and if you didn't see it, you should watch it, because you should understand what we mean when we say Zionism is a struggle for African people as well, because they've spent decades sabotaging Africa, because Africa served as a base, because Africa is very close to Palestine, occupied Palestine. So Africa served as a base for Palestinian resistance fighters. They weren't going to be able to operate out of Europe. So Africa was the closest place that they could do that. And oftentimes they did that. And because of that, the Zionists, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, established firm grounding throughout the African continent and began to sabotage genuine liberation movements who were in unity with the Palestinian struggle, movements that were operational to bring about liberation for the African continent. So, if you understand that, then you know that obviously to resist that, the Palestinian fighters who were engaged in Africa involved themselves in attacking the neo-colonial forces that keep Africa oppressed. So we talked a couple of weeks ago about how that happened in Ethiopia with the neo-colonial regime there. It happened in Niger. It happened certainly in Libya. It's happened all over the African continent, where Palestinian resistance fighters who were based there were also engaged in work to unite with, as we gave the example a couple of weeks ago, with the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, who were fighting for their liberation on the Horn of Africa. They had relationships with Palestinian resistance fighters who were operational there as well. So these folks gave their lives fighting. I'm talking about the Palestinians, gave their lives in Africa, fighting side by side with our African liberation movements. And then we can also talk about, even for Africans outside of Africa, in 2014, when the resistance was waging in this country, where the Black Lives Matter movement emerged from, the killings of Trayvon Martin in Florida, here in the United States, and Mike Brown in Missouri in August of 2014. And people were in the streets, and the police were doing what they do, throwing tear gas canisters at people who were peacefully protesting. What happened? The Palestinian youth in occupied Palestine, in Gaza, and in the West Bank, they started tweeting to the African activists in Missouri and all throughout this country techniques on how to throw the tear gas canisters back at the police, because there is really today nobody more experienced at how to do those types of things than the Palestinian resistance fighters. So this was identified by the Africans on the ground, on the streets in this country, and they began to utilize these tactics. And this, of course, increased the repression on the Palestinian people in occupied Palestine. But don't come to us spewing vomit out of your mouth, talking about when nobody ever engages in solidarity with African people or Black people, whatever term you use. Don't come to us with that nonsense, because when you do that, what you're telling us is that you do not even have enough respect for our people and our struggle to spend 5 minutes engaging in any study that can reveal to you what Shukura and I have just said, and many, many, many more examples. So this is an important part of dissecting this confusion about solidarity, because again, solidarity is always a two-way street. It's always a two-way street. This reactionary concept out here that we give solidarity to people and they don't ever give it to us, that can only be spoken by people who are engaged in their individualistic life, are not involved in any organizations engaging in struggle, and don't know anything about what that looks like, and are just talking about, what people who are just as ignorant as they are saying about it on social media, who know nothing. I gave the example a couple of weeks ago, one of these types of formations, full of African people was talking about when the issue of anti-Asian hate was being raised. Well, they don't ever have any solidarity. Someone asked in a post, name one Asian organization that's ever had solidarity with our people. And I within 10 seconds, I had written like 7 or 8 Asian organizations. I'm not going to tell you who they are. If you know so much, you should know already. So then people were like, well, I guess, all this. And I said, y'all just, you don't have the humility to just say, I don't know what I'm talking about. You just taught me something. And then some people started acknowledging that, but there were still some that were still trying to find some ridiculous way to talk. Like, you don't even know. 2 seconds ago, you didn't even know any of these organizations. Now you're arguing with me about what they do. You don't know, your phone is not going to tell you that quickly. This is the life and the work that I'm engaged in. Don't be an idiot. So this is important to understand. Solidarity is always a two-way street, and it's always been a two-way street, and it always will be a two-way street. And then, it's a challenge because most people aren't thinking comprehensively about this. And what I mean by that is folks are not thinking about what's required to win. In fact, I would argue a lot of people out here don't really believe that we can win. And when I say win, I'm talking about us winning our independent freedom and liberation. A lot of people out here honestly don't believe that's possible. They will never admit that because they know how they would look if they did, but they don't believe it. They believe that really the best we can do is find a comfortable place within the capitalist system and just operate from there. That's the reason why people support these capitalist institutions and think people like Kamala Harris and Barack Obama are progress, because you believe that this is the best way that we can achieve forward progress is through that model. That's what you believe. And the reason why people like myself don't believe that is because we know that there's so much more that we deserve and that we can do than just that. That's nothing. These people put all this energy into electing this Biden clown and trying to tell me that that's the primary thing that needs to happen. And I'm telling them, at the end of the day, both Biden and Trump are old, white, cracker, racist for the white supremacist capitalist system. Just one, like Malcolm said, is a wolf and the other's a fox. Just like Malcolm said, but both at the end of the day are canines and they're going to bite you. And, that's irrefutable, and I think the evidence is around us every day. We just don't pay attention. Now you got Biden 2 days ago talking about Cuba as a failed state. Ain't that something? Now, what is this country? What victories has this country led? People, it's the greatest country on earth. The only thing that this country is great in is incarcerating people. They're unmatched with that. Nobody, with the exception of China, and China has almost 2 billion people. So it has many more people than the 350 million people that live here. But other than that, nobody can match the incarceration. It's one of the worst countries on earth when it comes to quality health care for people. One of the worst countries on earth when it comes to education. I mean, the dumbest, stupidest people on earth live in this country, the most technologically advanced country on earth. The dumbest people on earth live here, and proud of people here will flaunt being idiots. I don't need to, like I heard somebody telling someone the other day, I've never traveled anywhere. I don't want to travel anywhere. Now, if that person had an ounce of sense in their head, they would realize how stupid it is to say something like that. But that kind of discourse is acceptable in this country because ignorance reigns supreme here, because nowhere on earth is ignorance as prevalent as it is in this country. So this country, yeah, it's the greatest country in the world when it comes to those things. But when it comes to advances for human civilization, this country's last in every single category. So people don't think comprehensively about what it takes to win. And so when we talk about solidarity, we're talking about it as a logical and irrefutable tool to help us gain capacity to defeat our enemies. It's the pathway for us to be able to do it. And anybody who won't even seriously think about that and won't engage in the process to understand that better, they're just clearly not interested in liberation. I mean, that could be the only logical reason why someone would reject solidarity is because they don't really believe that liberation is possible. And by liberation, we don't mean you getting a business and becoming a participant in the capitalist society. That's not liberation. That's not liberation, because there's no way that you can argue that anything under this system at the end of the day is going to benefit the exploitation of our people more than anything else. Yeah, you can set yourself up so that you get some financial rewards for yourself individually, but you cannot argue that operating within this system is going to provide freedom and justice for the majority of African people and all of oppressed humanity. Nobody can effectively make that argument. There's just no pathway to argue for that. I told you all that I've engaged in work around pension plans and just doing research around pension plans to make sure that the investments, because the way you invest in a pension plan or any investment whatsoever is you invest in stocks, and the stocks are based on production of products and services that happens around the world. And when I was engaged in that work, it was almost virtually impossible to find investments that were not reaped in exploiting somebody, because that's how you make money in a capitalist world, is you have to stand on top of somebody to do that. There is no way to do that. So I don't care how good intentioned you are. If you have a business in here to make money, you have to pay people lower wages. There's no way around that. There is no way around that. The only way around that is if you have a co-op type business, which is a socialist model. And most of the time when people are talking about businesses, that's not what they're talking about doing. So if you're not talking about doing that, and don't lie and say you are if you know you're not, then what you're talking about is the capitalist model, and that's an exploitative model by default. There is no way around that. So most people don't even know how to think about something outside of that parameter, because if they did, they would recognize solidarity is a logical approach of people, as Shukura said, oppressed by the same enemy, to figure out how to work together to take down that enemy. That's just common first grade logic, you all. That's all that is. And anybody trying to argue against that, that's just somebody that doesn't understand how to win. At least win on a way that means something. So the benefits of solidarity are profound. You know, imperialism's strongest weapon is keeping us opposed to each other instead of us being united. There's no question about that. So if we're sitting around here fighting each other, well, I want to fight against the government is giving away some funds. So they offered the indigenous people some money, so we should be getting that money. Now, what kind of idiotic argument is that? So you're sitting there, one slave arguing against another slave because the master's dropping crumbs off the table. And you don't have enough sense to see what a setup that is. Instead of you trying to figure out how to unite with the other slave and get on top of that table and beat that master down and take the whole loaf of bread, you're going to stand there on the ground arguing over a crumb. I mean, that's absolutely insane. But that's what happens in this society. Well, they got an anti-Asian hate bill and we didn't get one. That's the level of low level of consciousness that we operate from. Like any fool would be dumb enough to believe that any Asian is safer because that toilet paper legislation was signed. And you got to be even more stupid than that to think that even if they did one for African people, that's going to make a single African 1 inch safer. Anybody that believes that, you just need to take your medication. I mean, that's absolutely insane to believe something like that. So clearly there's no question that our ability to recognize each other's place in this oppressive system is a strength. It's a way for us to ensure that the best tool that our enemies have against us, divide and conquer, is no longer effective. The more we understand the necessity to unite against injustice everywhere, that just makes us so much stronger in our quest to fight. Now, we've already given you, and you can go back, all these videos are on abetterworld.me, www.abetterworld.me. If you didn't catch the Zionist Israeli sabotage in Africa, you should check it out. There's books you can read, but if you don't want to read, because we got a lot of YouTube PhDs, then include in your YouTube thesis to watch that video on Zionist Israeli sabotage of Africa. Because if you go do that, it's right there on a betterworld.me. What we talked about on there is in depth are the industries in Africa that are dominated by Zionist Israel, and how Zionist Israel, to protect that, like the diamond industry that Shukura touched on briefly, to protect that, the Zionist state of Israel has engaged in strong relationship building with the neo-colonial governments in Africa to repress movements of resistance. Because once those neo-colonial governments go, that's going to sabotage Zionist Israel's ability to operate its exploitative industries in Africa. So they have a vested interest in ensuring that oppression against African people continues. So the stronger the Palestinian resistance gets against these people, if they win, guess what? That means a strong victory for the African masses all over the African world. There's no denying that, you all. And honestly, we don't understand how people cannot connect those dots. I mean, it's right in front of you if you look at it. So it makes absolutely no sense. Just like it makes no sense for Palestinians. I don't care about African people. The people involved in the Palestinian struggle, they've also figured that out. That's why they have been doing the things that I just got through talking about a few minutes ago, because they recognize the stronger our fight is against our enemies, the stronger it makes their fight that they're engaged in. I mean, this is like arguing against this stuff is like arguing that we breathe oxygen. Like, you know, and at some point, like if a fool is standing there like, I don't believe that oxygen exists, then we just have to let you believe that. I mean, because it becomes a waste of our time to keep arguing things that are irrefutable, you know, to people. So we're talking to the people who just don't know and need to learn something. But for those of you that, you know, nobody's going to talk you down from that YouTube PhD, then, I mean, there's just no help for you. And it becomes more of a thing of like what Malcolm was talking about when he said, he asked the crowd who wants freedom, and everybody raised their hand. And then he said, well, who's willing to die for freedom? And half the crowd raised their hand. And he said, who's willing to kill for freedom? And only 5 or 6 people raised their hand. And he pointed to the 5 or 6 people and said, the first people you got to kill is everybody else that didn't raise their hand. That's the solution for those people that we're talking about who continue to engage in these ridiculous arguments that prevent us from moving forward. Our movement is weak right now, but one day we'll gain strength. And we'll be able to find people like this, throw a tire around you in hot tar and set it on fire because you were doing nothing to advance humanity. And we got to get these people out the way. I heard a minister say once at a sermon, we cannot move forward until we have more funerals. And you might think that's cruel to say, but it's absolutely undeniable with this nonsense. Some people are always going to refuse to do anything for anybody other than themselves. And if we're ever going to move forward, we have to move through that. There's just no way around that. And if that offends you, then it's probably because you're one of those people. That's probably why it offends you. So no sensible person can argue that victory for Palestinian people creates conditions for that, you know, that can argue against the concept that victory for Palestinians is also victory for African people and all oppressed people. You know, every victory for every oppressed people is a victory for all oppressed people. And this is the type of consciousness that we have to begin to institutionalize in our struggles on all levels. It's very important because as long as we're operational on these backward concepts, well, all I care about is what's happening with my people, that's not possible to take that type of position and seriously engage and struggle for justice and liberation. That's not possible to do that because the oppression is intertwined. And so there's no way to separate it. We just gave you the example of Zionism in Africa. We can give you the same example about the indigenous people here in the Americas. And how you going to separate that from the African struggle for resistance when the empire was built, the capitalist empire was built on stealing their land and making us work that land to build the wealth for them. There's no way to separate that. There's no way to separate the fact that so many of our people's land ran to the indigenous people for safe haven when we were escaping the slave plantations. There's no way to separate that. You all don't know that. We don't know the history. We think it's just an accident today that the descendants of the indigenous people and African people live in the same squalor and communities here in 2021. We think that's an accident. It's always been like that. And instead of us recognizing that and saying, like, we've always been with these people are our family. We have to unite with them so that we can solve these problems. They got us so dumbed down that we'll sit there like, well, I can't stand these people living next to me. You know, all I want to do is be like the master. I want to be where he is. And I can't do that living next door. They got us so ignorant that that's how a lot of us think. And that's where we have to work through that nonsense, you all. It's getting us nowhere. You can't argue that this thinking like that has really made a lot of progress for us as a people. It's done nothing for us. Because number one, you're not going to be where the master is. You're not going to get there. You know, you just saw the story about the football player bought a house in Florida in an exclusive community. And when he came there with his family to move in, these people that live there, they called the police on him. This man got the keys to his house, moving in his community. We don't understand this. We think, well, they don't recognize our rights. You ain't got no rights. You don't have no rights. And the only people that don't understand that is you. Everybody else is clear. Them white people that call the police are clear. He does not belong here. They're not thinking, oh, we don't want to violate his rights. He ain't got no rights. They're clear about that. The only people confused about that are us. And then when these things happen, we sitting up there looking doofus. Oh, they wouldn't let me in my house. They should have came. I wish they should come out in white robes and hoods with torches. If you're that insane that you don't understand who we are in this society, they should come out and set your car on fire with you in it. Because that's the only way that some of these people are going to ever wake up, is if they have to come at you like that. That's the only way you can get it. You can't see it any other way. And that's incomprehensible for anybody who's trying to think about what's going on. So I hate to make it sound like that, but I mean, come on, y'all, like, we have got to take responsibility for understanding what's really going on here and stop perpetuating this nonsense. Like, it's so much nonsense that gets perpetuated and we act like that makes sense. And that's why while we're doing that, people are suffering, people are dying. That's why it's so important to stop this nonsense so we can move forward. So the fastest road to victory is solidarity. That's the best way for us to get to victory. And so, you know, people that don't get that are people that aren't engaged. You're not engaged by reading social media. You're not engaged by knowing people who are involved in the struggle and talking to them. The only way you're engaged is by participating yourself, not for 1 day, 5 days, a couple of months, but on an ongoing, consistent basis. That's the only way you're engaged. And if you're not doing that, you're not qualified to speak about it. Nobody cares about your opinion about it because you don't know anything about it. It's like me talking about giving birth to a child. If I did that to some of you who have birthed children, I'm disagreeing with you. I look like a fool doing that. Well, that's how you look when you're expressing your opinions with those of us who do this work and you're disagreeing. You're not even involved in it. How the hell do you know anything about it? Just because you talk to somebody that's engaged in it, that's not going to help you understand it. You only understand it by participating in it. So individualism or organization, we have got to decide that question. That's the fundamental question. Are we going to figure out how to unite with people and build with people to create capacity to win? Or are we could continue to, I'm just going to do it my way. I don't want to deal with people. I have my own vision individually for how these problems are going to be solved. And I just want to do that. That is not working, you all. Everybody has tried that. That does not work. It doesn't work. The only thing that accomplishes is it might get you some individual rewards. And as I've said repeatedly and will continue to say, for some of us, that's all we really care about. And if that's the case, I'm not attacking you for that. I'm just saying be honest, because the confusion is making it more difficult for those of us who want to organize collective struggle. So just be honest and say, I don't care about anybody but just get up at events, be on social media, post about it, and just say, I just want to say, I don't care about anybody but myself. All I'm trying to do is carve out a niche for myself to move forward on an individual basis. If you don't do that, I could care less. Just say that. And then when I come along talking about collective liberation, people are like, okay, yeah, I see that that's the only pathway. But as long as people are trying to provide cover for your individualistic selfishness by claiming that what you're doing is about advancing the masses, it just makes it so much harder for genuine people who are trying to organize for justice. Because there's no question that the only route to real justice is collective organization. Individuals don't make history, only the masses do. So there's no question. So if you don't want to participate in collective organization, at least stop getting in our way. You can at least do that. Be honest on social media. I'm a selfish, you know what, and all I'm trying to do is advance myself. So that's what people should do. And that's what I tell people all the time. Just do that and stop pretending, because you're making it more difficult than those of us who are trying to do something here. And then we have to make study of the Palestinian question, indigenous question, Irish question, Filipino question, African question, all oppressed people, a centerpiece of our work. And that means we have to be engaged in study groups. Now, we say that all the time, but I know, because I do this every day, I know that most of us, we don't, like, if we're waiting for somebody to organize us into a study group or to come and organize whatever we are participating in that we want to call a study group. Because some people getting together with books is not necessarily organized political education. It could be a whole lot of things. It could be ego worship, just trying to read some so I could gain some. I have no intention of doing anything with the information, whatever it is. There's so much dysfunctional stuff out here, who knows? But I'm saying you have to make these questions central to your work. And as we said many times, we'll say it again, you only need one other person to start. So you don't get to say that, well, I don't have time to get people, like, you one other person, and you can start this process and then you build from there. So you have to make that a centerpiece of what you're doing to move forward on these questions. And then you have to have a program in your organizing effort that it engages in solidarity work around the Palestinian, indigenous, Irish, Filipino, all of these struggles. You have to have a component that does that, whether it's educational, whether it's practical work that you're doing, whatever it is, you define that. Nobody's telling you what it has to be. We're just saying you have to have that as a part of your work. And if we all were doing all of those things, which it really isn't all that much, we're talking about 2 or more people saying, okay, what we're going to do is have a quarterly educational session where we'll spend 2 months getting people aware of it. Then we'll bring people together and we'll talk about these things. We'll have reading, we'll do that. And as an organization, that's just bare minimum. That's not that much work, but it's a significant amount of work. It's not necessarily a large quantity of work, but it's a significant amount of work. So that kind of thing will move us forward, because we're battling against MSNBC, New York Times, LA Times, San Francisco Examiner, Chicago Tribune, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox, what are all them other, all the social media outlets that are out here now, InfoWars, all this nonsense we're fighting against. And there's only a few, very few entities like this one that you're listening to right now. And most of people don't know about this because we don't do the work to spread it like we need to. So that's what we have to do. And if we create as many vehicles like this as we can, then we will begin to see ourselves be able to influence the dialogue around these questions. And once we do that, we'll begin to change the culture and the atmosphere around these questions. That's what it'll take. But if you're someone listening to this and you don't even have one other person you can organize to listen to these broadcasts with you, then that's what you need to work on. I mean, if you don't know one person you can say, hey, let's do this together. I mean, you should really want to think about that. Like, you're calling yourself a social justice warrior. You can't even get one person to do something. I don't know what kind of warrior you're supposed to be, but that's something you need to figure out, like how you can do that. You know how you can make that happen. That everybody should bring somebody. That's just the bare minimum expectation you should place on yourself. Bare minimum. Just to start. We're not even talking about organizing anything consistent. We're just talking about when you participate in this type of thing like we're doing right here, bring somebody. You got a whole week until next Sunday. Just sit down and say, okay, I'm gonna make a list of 7, 8 people, and I'm gonna ask them, hey, would you participate with this? I think you'd like it. And if you can't do that, then what are you really doing? You know, that's what we're talking about. That's what we need to have happen. Because CNN has 1.5 million viewers a week. Fox has 2 million viewers on average. MSNBC has 1.5 million viewers. So how are we going to compete with the backward reactionary propaganda they're spewing out when unless we don't have the money to air like they do, but we have way more people than they do. They have 20 people doing all the work to send out their lies to 2 million people. We don't need but we got 2 million people, and we got 5 people doing all the work. That's what needs to be corrected, you all. So we need your help. You need to make it your responsibility. Like, I'm gonna do that. Start there. Like, I'm gonna tell people about all of these resources that I'm about to tell you about. So we're gonna focus on that for the next few minutes before we close out. We're not even gonna tell you join an organization, because we know, like, people just, for the most part, not ready to do that. We get it. So we're gonna take even more baby steps than that. And we're just gonna say, so think about who you can get to participate in some of these activities. So the first one is in the middle of the page on the left. We want to invite you to come and participate in our All African People's Revolutionary Party and All African Women's Revolutionary Union Pan-African Women's Day. It's an international institution that we have every year, and you should definitely participate. Don't say, well, I'm a man, I ain't got nothing to do with it. If you saying that, then you're just lost. Oppression against anybody is the responsibility of everybody. So Pan-African Women's Day is for everyone, and you see the link there. You have to register, so copy that down and come. It's on July 31st. It's 9 a.m. Pacific time. Yes, we start early because our events are international, you all. So it's not just based on your individual schedule where you are. It's based on trying to create the most logical time for the majority of people on Earth. So come and participate. We talk to you about the work we're doing, and you'll get a chance to, a lot of people, well, I don't believe they're doing that work. Well, if you participate every once in a while, you'll see how the work manifests itself. So we have participants from some of our sister parties, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School in Nigeria, the Kenyan Socialist League in Kenya, people like that participating in Pan-African Women's Day. We have one of our young comrades in Burkina Faso in the APRP who relocated there from the Bay Area here, participating. Comrade Sister Inem, who is in the same actual circle that Shukura is in. So come and support and participate and let people know about it. I mean, it's not just our responsibility to let people know, it's just as much your responsibility. You say you want justice, that's what you gotta do, you all. I mean, you come on here and just consume and you don't tell a single person about it. What they got for me. Like, that's the problem. We gotta expand beyond that. We need your help. Liberation is collective. So do that. I want to shout, some of you do that. I know there's my good comrade, friend in Colorado, Shan, very good at doing that. I know Mark, who's on here on Zoom with us. Oh, okay, I got my family, they want to listen in. That's what we need everybody to be doing. That's what it's all about. If you do that, that's a wonderful thing. That's how we're going to get free, you all. So please do that. We have all these podcasts down here. We got the Pontula one. The time is wrong. It's actually an hour earlier. Sorry about that. I'll correct that next time. EST, Forward Ever, Revolutionary African Women, our weekly New Mexico comrades in the APRP. I did correct that one, 12 noon Mountain Time. So on Thursdays. So check that out. All of those happen. And you see in the middle of the page, we have Hood Communists. We have our bi-weekly Telegram. Sign up for Telegram. It's a free app. in your app store, and you can participate in our discussions. We had one on African identity. I actually missed it. I had planned to be there and participate, but I was dealing with some Proud Boys. So this is what we do. So that's fine. They got dealt with. You know, come and join us a week from Thursday. Hood Communist every Thursday. Check out our new articles, abetterworld.me. Donate there, please. We appreciate those of you that have. We'll respond to you. We've been busy, but we will respond to you. We appreciate you. All the videos from here are on there. You can find them. And then next week, you all, we're going to bring extensive fire. July 25th, 4 to 5 p.m. We're going to talk about Shukura and I, Cuba protests and Europe, U.S. imperialism. We're going to break down in common language the lies they're telling you about what's happening in Cuba right now. We're going to break all of that down for you next week. So if you want to get some concrete information about the lie, talking about what because they didn't deal with, they can't deal with COVID and people starving in Cuba. If you're hearing that nonsense, we're gonna break down those backward capitalist lies next week. So please tell people and let people know about this, because otherwise, how are they gonna know about it? Because all they got otherwise is MSNBC and CNN and CIA and YouTube, of course. So we need that. And continue to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. I was out of state last month training people on the contents of the book, Community Defense. I'm leaving again this week to go out of state and do the same thing. We've got 2 events in 2 different states this week. So we are continuing to do our work. We ask you to help us. We need you. We appreciate you for joining in. We just ask you to do something for us. Bring people next week. Bring people to all of these things. It's very important, you all. And if you do that, that's all we're going to bother you about right now. We'll talk about the organizational piece later, but do that for now. We appreciate that. Forward ever, backwards never. We want you to enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. White supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia. We want to completely wipe them all out. Pan-Africanism. And as we know with capitalism, y'all already know it's got to go. Have a great rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever.